Drive Live Formula One.
Well, what a shocking qualifying session we've just seen for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Sir Lewis Hamilton taking his 104th pole position in Formula One and his first pole since the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix back in 2021. And he did it by the smallest of margins, beating the reigning world champion Max Verstappen to the pole position by 3 thousandths. And then completing the top three was Lando Norris in the McLaren, still on form in that newly upgraded car. Further down the field, there was a little bit of upset. We thought there might be with this new format for qualifying, the alternative tyre allocation. And the big scalps that fell early doors were George Russell's in the Mercedes. And then a little later on, we were expecting Sergio Perez, or at least hoping Sergio Perez could have a solid weekend here in Hungary. But unfortunately, P9 was the best the Mexican do, making it through to Q3, but not enough to get on terms with his teammate. So plenty to unpick from that qualifying session. With me to discuss it all is our lead commentator this weekend, Chris Hartley, and the former Williams F1 driver, Jack Aitken. Lewis Hamilton sounded so emotional, actually looked visibly emotional, didn't he, Jack, at the end of that qualifying session? 3 thousandths, and yet those 3 thousandths sort of kind of show the huge work that Mercedes have been doing behind the scenes for the last 18 months. Gosh, it was close.
Yeah, whether you do it by a mile or a centimetre, it's going to be the same result. You know, he's just going to be overjoyed with that result, and the whole team at Brackley. It's really commendable how far they've come since the start of the season with that car. Real shame for George that he couldn't be up there to fight with him as well. I think he might have had the pace to do it, but obviously getting tripped up with some traffic in the early stages of quali. But we were watching that lap, and it's clear that Lewis is just loving the combination of the balance of his Mercedes and this track. He's in a really good rhythm. When we look at the analysis between him and Verstappen, he's beating Verstappen in all of the really technical and twisty parts of the circuit. Verstappen was only able to be faster than him in the parts that it demands sort of brute downforce, which of course the Red Bull is still incredibly good at, but the balance just not there for Max today.
Yeah, and we're talking about it being a shocking qualifying session. I think at the end of yesterday's practice sessions after FP2, Lewis Hamilton talking to the media saying, you know, this is the car at its worst, and you sort of thought, goodness me, Mercedes have got a hill to climb here, they're pushing water up a hill. And then he goes and puts it on pole. I mean, the work they've done overnight, Chris, must be incredible.
It's so often the way, though, isn't it, with Lewis? It comes together when it needs to come together. On Saturday, on Sunday, he digs deep, he finds something. I mean, he's obviously a special driver, and that was a pretty special lap. It's funny, isn't it? He's had all of these pole positions, 104 now, and that will probably rate as one of his best, just because it's so long since he's been on pole position, and just because he's had to be digging deep just to be fighting to get onto the podium. You know, this is a driver that's used to winning races, and he was pretty delighted with the podium at Silverstone a couple of weeks ago. And I think it feels like there's been even more sort of sense of a push and urgency for Mercedes this weekend because of the improvement that we saw 2 weeks ago, especially for McLaren. And that's, I think, driven them even more to say, look, come on, we need to find something here. And he has, and he's always been good around this circuit. But he's still got his work on his hands if he wants to get his ninth win around the Hungarian. It's not going to be easy.
Certainly has got his work cut out, but it was a record-breaking ninth pole at the Hungaroring. That's the most by any driver at a single circuit in F1 history. And it's a fourth consecutive pole for a Mercedes at the Hungaroring. We've spoken about George Russell having a difficult day. Of course, he was on pole here last year. But let's hear from Lewis Hamilton then, the man of the moment taking pole position in Hungary.
Lewis, yesterday you told me the car was at its worst today, pole number 104. Yeah. Congratulations, you must be buzzing right now.
No, it's night and day different today. It was literally, we turned it up on its head. Yesterday the car felt terrible. The balance was all over the place. It was very, very difficult to extract any performance from it. And we did great work overnight. This morning it all of a sudden came back alive and it felt great. And we were all pleasantly surprised. And then qualifying was a challenge for everybody, but we that last run was good, man.
And can you just describe the emotions? I mean, hard to sum up in words, but you must be elated.
I definitely am. I'm really just full of joy, just really happy for everyone in the team. Honestly, everyone's been working so hard for such a long time. We've had to be very, very critical every time on debriefs of where the car's problem. Nothing's ever kind of been good enough. We've always been like, we need to do more. We have to keep pushing harder, and and it's been tough for everybody, but everyone's continued to push hard, and definitely didn't expect this coming into this weekend, but we'll take it, and we just have to see if we can hold on to it tomorrow.
Well, that was Lewis Hamilton. He will lead the field away tomorrow, lining up on the front row alongside Max Verstappen. And I'm happy to say that the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson, has just joined us fresh from the press conference. I imagine it was a happy Lewis Hamilton, maybe an emotional Lewis Hamilton?
Yeah, almost relieved, I think. I mean, he was all of those things. I mean, obviously, the big question was, how has he been feeling over the last 18 months, you know? The penultimate race of last year was his last pole position. You know, he made it quite clear at the beginning of this year he wasn't happy with the decisions Mercedes had made in not changing their car philosophy over into the sort of more Red Bull type design. But he said he never lost confidence in the team. It was just a question of how long it was going to be. He said he felt like this year's car was like he's starting the season with the twin sister or brother of last year's car, which didn't give him a lot of confidence. But they've made some big changes to it, not for this weekend, but in the previous races. And I think a combination of the strength of the car, the way they blend with the strength of the characteristics of this circuit. He was saying that they're still losing out big time, he described it, in terms of 4 and 11, which are the two fastest corners on the circuit, as Jack was alluding to a minute ago. And but everywhere else he's making up the time. And actually, he said he was 4 tenths up on his previous lap at the last corner, but he lost 1.5 tenths to 2 tenths with a crosswind, and he was just desperately hoping that wasn't going to cost him pole position. Obviously, it didn't in the end. Now, obviously, looking forward to the race. Can he win it? Well, he's won in Hungary more than any other driver by far. He was saying that Verstappen's race pace yesterday was exceptional, was the word he used. But, you know, maybe if we can keep track position, we've got a chance. So I think one of the most interesting aspects of the race is how does Verstappen take this, because he's been so calm and so controlled all season, but we often see that when he's racing Hamilton, he's a slightly different driver. He just doesn't quite like racing Hamilton as much as the others. It's almost like he wants to prove himself more. Think about what happened in Brazil last year when they collided with each other. Is he going to take that same approach with Hamilton tomorrow, or is he just going to go, do you know what? I'm so far ahead in the championship. I don't need to risk anything. I'll win it if I can, obviously, but I'm not going to go Mad Max, if you like, as some people might call it. I'm so fascinated to see how that develops.
Yeah, I think we all are. Let's hear from Max Verstappen then, losing out by 3 thousandths this afternoon.
Well, Max, we have to share the poles around the other drivers a little bit. Heard you complaining about balance, grip in the car. Was that the main limitation today?
I think so far the whole weekend has been quite difficult, just to get the front and rear to sync up. You know, one time is the rear, one time is the front. Qualifying was more the front. And then, you know, of course, when you have these kind of issues, you can't really touch the car anymore through qualifying. So I tried to make the best of it with some tools. I think when I went into Q3, my first lap, and I saw that we were first, I was actually surprised, because I didn't expect that after Q2, where I was still struggling a lot with the balance. And then, I just tried to push a little bit more in Q3 run 2, and the car didn't have it. So extremely sensitive over one lap so far this weekend. I think our long run looks a lot more competitive, so I'm quite happy with that. Yeah, it's still going to be quite tough, I think, tomorrow to get in front. But if we are better on tyres, then I still, predict a good race.
And do you feel that the way the car is now, it might actually work well in the race, for example?
Possibly. I mean, it's going to be warmer tomorrow. Normally, of course, that's even harder on tyres. Normally also on rear tyres. So it might help us. But yeah, so far, every time what we did on a one lap didn't really work. But every time we went into a long run, the car was actually not bad. So hopefully it's the same tomorrow.
So that's Max Verstappen. He'll start on the front row, but not in the top spot, which I'm sure he's become very accustomed to. And I don't think he's going to like this stat. The winner in Hungary has only come from second on the grid once in the last 12 races. And that was Hamilton back in 2016. I think that's the stat. There we go. So Max Verstappen, you'd say he has his work cut out, but he's got the fastest car on the grid. So, Jack, surely it's his for the taking, or does he do like Andrew Benson's just said, play it safe, come home second, take the points he needs? He doesn't need to risk anything, does he?
He doesn't, but then the lead's so big in the championship, I don't think he'll care if he crashes tomorrow in the context of the championship. You know, he has that cushion and then some So if I was in his position, I'd be saying, oh, I'm going to go for the win. I can afford to race as I like to. And, as you mentioned, he does seem to race Lewis a bit harder. Perhaps that's not exactly the right word, but they have history. And he's going to have to tomorrow to overtake him. If he doesn't do it in the pit stop, it's a very difficult track to get past. Your opportunities really come at the start of the lap with the first two corners. And we often see people tripping up over each other with long side-by-side battles, with going right in the first corner, then left, and then right again through turns 2 and 3. There's a lot of opportunity for racing and wheel-to-wheel action. So
we'll see. Yeah, strategy obviously does play a huge part at the Hungaroring. The key thing, actually, for these two front runners is they don't have their wingmen nearby, Andrew. They've got Sergio Perez for Red Bull, much further down the order in P9, George Russell back in P18. So Max and Lewis are out front alone. So how do they trick the other into making a little bit of a strategic mistake?
Well, it might just not be between those two as well. Lando Norris was only 800ths off pole position in the McLaren, and he's got his teammate right next to him on the grid. So McLaren can play strategy with their two cars if Piastri can stay in touch in the race. Whereas, as you say, Russell and Perez, by the way, what another terrible weekend that he's had, even though he did make it into the top 10. Not a good time for him to be having that with Daniel Ricciardo. We'll come to Daniel Ricciardo in a bit. But yes, so I think everyone will expect the Red Bull to have stronger race pace. Verstappen will still go into the race as favourite. And Red Bull, I would imagine, if Verstappen can't get Hamilton at the start, and Norris was just saying actually in the press conference that Hamilton has typically the best starts on the grid in the Mercedes. And Norris, don't forget, beat Verstappen away at Silverstone 2 weeks ago. So if Verstappen can't get Hamilton on the first lap, Red Bull will be looking for some clear air to put him into somehow with the strategy, so he can make up some time on his own. The question is, can they find it? Mercedes will obviously be doing absolutely everything they can to stop Verstappen getting that clear air. And where does Norris do in the race? Because I think Norris, he looked really competitive in Silverstone. They didn't expect to be so quick in Hungary. They are so quick in Hungary. I wouldn't discount Norris from the fight between Hamilton and Verstappen at the front at all. So, it's a really intriguing race. Perhaps the most intriguing race of the season so far that's set up, because the only other time Red Bull had been beaten in qualifying was in Baku by Charles Leclerc, and everybody knew the Ferrari would go backwards in the race because of its tyre wear. That certainty is not there for tomorrow. So it's all to play for all of those people at the front.
I hope you haven't just cursed it as a commentator, Andrew Benson. But hey, look, I'm staying cheerful and optimistic about this. Lando Norris, yes, a P3 for the British driver ahead of his teammate Oscar Piastri. Let's hear how Lando is feeling after that session, and who knows, maybe tomorrow he could just be a bystander as Max and Lewis get caught up in any sort of shenanigans and he can just sail on past into the lead. Let's hear from him.
I'm disappointed, I guess. If you're doing within a tenth of pole, it feels like you should be on pole if you put the lap together, So I guess as an overall picture, I'm happy the team did a good job, P3 and P4 for both of us. So a good weekend so far, but as a driver, I'm not the happiest. I feel like I made too many mistakes and that cost me today.
Okay, well, you baited it. You said disappointed. So what was it that you felt like could have been different? Was there a corner, was something that could have been different for you to be able to get that last 10?
There's always little things, just putting the lap together. It wasn't the cleanest. I guess there's always an element of risk involved in trying to push it a little bit more, but nothing major. Just I don't know how much it was between me and P1, but if it's a 10th, there's definitely a 10th in it. So yeah, frustrating, but I'm happy. P3 still is a good position for tomorrow, so still a good day.
It's funny, isn't it? 6 months ago, if I'd offered Lando Norris P3 in qualifying, he'd have bitten my arm off for it. He used to tell me in the media pen, the car's not good, I'm just focusing on my driving. Suddenly he's getting a P3, and Chris, he's disappointed with that position. It shows that he feels this car's got a lot more to offer, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it's a great position to be in a sense, isn't it? When you're disappointed to be third on the grid, and it was how close he was as well. I mean, he was only 85 thousandths of a second away from being on pole position, so you're talking centimetres around a lap here. And he is a driver that, like the front two in a sense, has got nothing to lose. Like Jack's already mentioned, Verstappen, he could have 3 DNFs and Perez could win 3 races and he'd still be the championship leader. He could even lose 4 actually. And then you got Hamilton, who's not, realistically, he's got no chance of winning the championship. He just wants to get a race win tomorrow. And I think you can throw Norris into that same boat. He's not really going to be thinking about championship points so much. He's going to be thinking, I could win a race here. And if they all trip over each other, then Oscar Piastri's obviously going to win from fourth on the grid, isn't he?
Obviously, yeah. No, I think actually the McLarens are in a great position because, as we've said, Lando clearly has the pace. Piastri is not that far behind, and you know, Hamilton and Verstappen, they could well end up just watching each other. The pit wall, you know, you can only really cover off so many other cars. So Red Bull and Mercedes for sure are going to be looking at each other when it comes to that crucial time around the pit stops. If they force each other's hand into an especially early stop, or perhaps a suboptimal strategy, maybe 2-stop rather than 1, this is where the 2 McLarens, suddenly they've got double the options and they're going to be able to react to what the 2 ahead of them are doing. So they could really end up in quite a fortuitous position, even without taking into account, that Lando is quick on merit.
Definitely a chance to score some big points for the team in Papaya tomorrow. So your top 3, it's Lewis Hamilton ahead of Max Verstappen and then Lando Norris. We'll discuss the other winners and losers next. One of the big talking points of the weekend was, of course, Daniel Ricciardo coming back onto the F1 grid. And a lot of expectation, perhaps a lot of pressure on his shoulders, Chris, to deliver. And when we talk about delivering, that really means beating your teammate. He did that today. He also got into Q2. What a result for AlphaTauri. What a result for Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah, it was a good effort, I think. I mean, the sort of reaction on the team radio afterwards, he wasn't exactly over the moon about it. It was a bit sort of like, well, yeah, it's all right. It's something to work with. You know, we can start from there. It's a starting point. He did beat his teammate, but not by much, actually, in that first part of qualifying. There's only 13 thousandths of a second between him and Tsunoda. So it was pretty tight, in fairness to the Japanese driver. But the car he's driving, which Nick De Vries has driven for the rest of the season, that's only been higher than 13th on the grid in one other qualifying session, and that was at Monaco by 1 position, 12th place. So I think it's fair to say he's had a pretty good day.
Yeah, let's put this into some kind of perspective. This is their best grid position since Monaco. So that's point 1, and Daniel Ricciardo's done it in his first race in the car. Now, yes, he's a very experienced, very accomplished driver, but let's not forget that he was sacked by McLaren effectively at the end of last year because he hadn't performed against Lando Norris. So he's given the team their best grid position for 2 months, and he's done it in his first Grand Prix back. And okay, he's only beaten Tsunoda by a few thousandths, but he's beaten Tsunoda, which is something De Vries only managed twice in 12 qualifying sessions all this year so far. So I think it's a really solid performance by Ricciardo. It's exactly what Red Bull will have wanted, and they will see this as complete justification for the decision they've made in sacking Nick De Vries. Okay, the margins aren't big at the moment, but for them to happen straight away, it would suggest that he's only going to go upwards from here. So it's good news all round for AlphaTauri and Red Bull.
Can he go upwards tomorrow, though, Andrew? Has he kind of got the most out of the car, do you think, over the course of a race weekend? And in race pace, when it comes to race pace, he's going to slip down the order?
I don't know about slipping down, but I can't imagine he's got much hope of going forward because, you know, all the cars ahead of him are fundamentally quicker than him, and he's got George Russell behind him in the Mercedes. So it's going to be hard to score a point, but you never know. But I think as it is for now, as he's been saying afterwards, you know, it felt fun again, it felt right. It's just a big win all round, I think, for Ricciardo and AlphaTauri and Red Bull.
Yeah, a good place to start. P13 for Daniel Ricciardo then. Let's hear how he's feeling after his first qualifying session back for quite some time.
I feel happy. I do. You know, obviously it's hard to. It was hard coming into the weekend knowing what position was going to make me happy. You know, in a way right now the position is, I don't want to say it lightly, but it's somewhat irrelevant. You know, I think the main thing was for me to get back in and feel good again, you know, behind the wheel of a race car, and obviously try to get up to speed as quick as I could with the AlphaTauri. So for that, I feel like, I've made some good progress in 2 days running, and as long as we keep progressing from here, then I'll continue to remain content.
Points handed out tomorrow, obviously. Have you got the feeling that this car is a car that you can lick the stamp and send it, as you said?
We'll see. You know, I haven't really got close with anyone yet on track or in these racing conditions, but yeah, I don't expect the racing to feel too foreign or weird for me. You know, I took a bit of time off, but it wasn't 2 years. You know, it was half a year or so. So, I mean, tomorrow will be fun, but of course, if there's some gaps, I'll see what the car can do.
Daniel Ricciardo talking to F1's Greg Stewart in the media pen after qualifying. So P13 for Daniel. A little bit further up the road is Sergio Perez, P9 for the Red Bull driver. His weekend got off to a difficult start, putting his car into the barriers in FP1. The team did a great job putting the car back together. He made it into FP2. Nothing amazing in that session. And then he really needed a good qualifying session this afternoon. Where did it get away from him? Is it the pressure? Is that mounting up too much on his shoulders? And what can he do tomorrow from P9 on a track that is tricky to overtake, even with a great car like the RB19?
I mean, to be clear, the pressure on him is now immense. I mean, it's been talked about a lot at this point, and even for someone who has quite a strong mental character, I think it would be hard to ignore the circumstances of what's happening around Sergio at the moment. You know, he's made a lot of unforced errors. He's not performing well versus his teammate. They put in Daniel into the AlphaTauri, who has now gone quite well in his first session back. He must be feeling it. And, you know, the suggestions are that he's not got not been in the best place mentally, given those unforced errors like the one that we saw in FP1. I mean, that was really a silly mistake. You know, it's the kind of lack of awareness of your own car that you would expect of someone far his junior and of his experience level. So it does seem like there are some cracks there. He would really, really have to turn on an amazing performance now, I think, to undo the damage that has been done in the last few races. Realistically, you know, it's historically the Red Bull bosses haven't had to wait very long to form a negative opinion of the drivers that have started this sort of downward spiral, as many people call it. So he's going to have to really, really fight hard over the next few races, and I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do enough to prove that.
They were, some say, ruthless with Nick de Vries, giving him 10 races. How ruthless could they be with Checo Perez, Andrew? I mean, is there a chance he loses his seat before the end of this season?
Well, you never know with Red Bull, do you? You'd have to say it would be you'd think it would be unlikely for them to do that. They don't need to do that, is the main point. They're going to win the Drivers' and the Constructors' Championships anyway, regardless of what they do with Perez. So there's nothing forcing their hand, whereas there was with de Vries. You know, AlphaTauri, they will have been looking at that and thinking, well, we don't really rate Tsunoda that much, and or at least not at the highest level. And we don't know what the car can do, and we could do with that team finishing as high as possible in the Constructors' Championship, because every position is worth millions of dollars. Red Bull don't have the same problem weight on them in that sense. So I'd be surprised if they changed him. But I think if this performance carries on towards the end of the year, Christian Horner's remarks that our drivers next year will be Max and Checo, as he put it earlier this week, may well turn out not to be true, given Red Bull's form. I mean, look at the gap. He's 4/10 behind Verstappen, more than 4/10 behind Verstappen. Now, and Verstappen's had a difficult day. You know, so that's the sort of time when Perez should be closer to him, not further away. So, you know, Verstappen was saying he hasn't been able to find a balance all weekend. And the car was, the complaint he had fundamentally, a car was switching between understeer and oversteer. It was fundamentally understeering, but if they tried to change the balance, then it became oversteer. They never got it right. Fundamentally, the balance was understeer. And that is what Perez is supposed to bring Perez closer to Verstappen, because as Verstappen put it, that's the worst kind of balance for me. And yet he's further away. And look at the gaps elsewhere on the grid, how tiny they are. You know, it's really bad news for Perez. And Jack's right. He's got to pull himself out of this slump really soon, or else Red Bull are going to make the decision now, even if they don't take the action now.
Yeah,
or at least there's that danger, I should say.
He's now 9-2 down in terms of qualifying against his teammate. Well, Nick de Vries was 8-2 down against his teammate, and look what happened to him. So nobody's infallible. You know, contracts can be terminated and changed whether or not they're meant to be for next year or not. And it just feels like a vicious loop now, doesn't it? Like he's just in this rut, and he, for whatever reason, can't get out. And it's strange because he started the year pretty well, actually. You know, he looked at one point like he might actually start to take the fight to Verstappen, and now, not even halfway through the season, he's 99 points behind, and he's having to drive the wheels off the car in the races because he's starting so far back. And he has done a pretty good job in the races to come through the pack, but you could argue he should do because he's got a Red Bull. But just to be second in the championship, he's having to fight and scrap, and he should be way up there.
But it's this trend that we see again and again in that second seat at Red Bull. whether it was the years when Vettel was dominant and more so now when Max is the number one there, it's something that you see a driver comes in, they do okay as a, like, air quotes, rookie to the team, whether they're a young driver or experienced, and then slowly as time goes on and they struggle to match that number one driver, it's almost like they dig harder and harder to try and find something, and then the mistakes start to come and the questions start to be raised of, oh, you've been here quite a while now, you should really be on that pace. And it starts this spiral, and we thought that Checo might be a bit more resistant to it, being older, being more experienced than some of the people that have come before, the Albons, the Gaslys, etc. But it turns out he's not.
In terms of Daniel Ricciardo being promoted to the Red Bull seat, is it actually wise for him just to stay at AlphaTauri? We know there are big changes coming for 2024. I know the name above the door is going to change, but they're going to be working more closely with Red Bull. Does he actually want to do more of what Pierre Gasly did and stay and stick and try and sculpt that team more around him, rather than cross that same bridge twice, go back to Red Bull, slot into the number 2 seat and run the risk of that terrible number 2 seat curse, Andrew?
Well, look, let's be clear. We're talking theoretically at the moment.
Yes.
You know, there's no indication from Red Bull that this is going to happen. There's no indication from Red Bull that they're thinking about it, although we all know Red Bull, you know, this is exactly what they will be thinking. As to if the opportunity arises, should Ricciardo stay at AlphaTauri, there's no way, first of all, that he's under contract. If they put him in the Red Bull car, they put him in the Red Bull car. And even if they gave him the option to say no, no racing driver is going to say no to a Red Bull. And it's not like Ricciardo wouldn't be going to somewhere where he doesn't know what to expect. He spent, 2.5 seasons, nearly 3 seasons alongside Max Verstappen. He started off ahead of him. He ended up a bit behind him, but it was pretty close between the two of them generally. Yes, Verstappen had developed an advantage by the end of 2018, and he definitely got the team around him, which is why Ricciardo left, essentially. I won't go into the full details of it now. So, of course, he'll take the chance if he gets it. On Perez, I think the issue is there's an expectation gap with reality. He started the year thinking he could compete for the championship. No one else in Formula One thought he could, really. They always thought it was going to fall away, and then it was a question of how he handled it. And he hasn't handled it very well. Somehow, he has to find a way to take a step back, just get a sense of reality again about what he's capable of. He's Sergio Perez. He is not going to be able to challenge Max Verstappen over a Formula One season. It's just not going to happen. He's not good enough. He's a really, really, really good Formula One driver, but he's not at that level. Very, very few drivers are. Some people might say no one is, but certainly there's only a tiny handful of drivers who could even think about competing with Max Verstappen in the same car. He's not one of them. He's got to accept that and settle into what his role at Red Bull is, which is to get the best out of himself in the car. If he gets himself back into that position, he'll be fine, but he's got to do that.
I feel like you need to spend some time with him, Andrew. Maybe the summer break is the perfect opportunity. You need to head to Mexico, have a quiet time with Sergio, get his head right, ready for the second half of the season. Well, another loser in today's qualifying session was George Russell. He'll start from P18, but it was traffic, not necessarily performance of the car, that ruined his day, Jack. How does he bounce back tomorrow? That car has obviously got pace, his teammates on pole, but does it have pace to carve through the field?
I think George won't have too much trouble resetting ahead of tomorrow. It's obviously a great disappointment, and for any teammate, when you're up against your teammate going on pole and you're down in 18th, then it's a pretty hard pill to swallow. But, I mean, he knows he's got a good car underneath him, that's clear. And there are opportunities for him to move forward, both at the start. We know the Mercedes is quick off the line and around the pit stop, so he'll just get his head down and do it. But I have to say, I think a lot of the suffering he had with the traffic was self-inflicted. We've heard this debate before about drivers saying, when you're lining up to start your lap, you need to stay in the queue. You don't want to jump people. It's a gentleman's agreement. And time again, we've seen that a lot of drivers simply don't agree and disrespect that and just fly through and take their position on the road. And it's really important because for every car that passes you, you're basically giving up 4 or 5 seconds of lap time effectively, because that's the gap that you need to have clean air on your wing, and George just kept letting cars past. He would try and react and jam on the throttle and kick a wheel spin. Oh crap, they've already gone through. Okay, I'll slow down again, make a gap. Oh no, there goes another one. And it was just a disaster watching him. He couldn't capitalize, he couldn't decide when to go and really get his elbows out. And then he got a bit moany over the radio, but like I said, I think that was largely down to him, that the engineer can only do so much for you in guiding you through those situations.
So the nice British guy needs to get a bit punchier, is that what we're saying?
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
No more sugar lumps or whatever, or crumpets or whatever he says when he's getting stressed. Well, hopefully he can have a word with himself overnight and he'll be punchy and get his elbows out tomorrow to work his way up the grid. George Russell will start from P18 in the Mercedes. Now I'm going to give the team award today, because I've just invented it, to Alfa Romeo. What a result for them. Zhou Guanyu, P5, and Valtteri Bottas, P7. What did they have for breakfast? What has changed with this Alfa Romeo car?
Well, I can tell you.
Were you there at breakfast?
They brought it up. Well, Valtteri Bottas will have had coffee, won't he?
He will have.
Maybe his own coffee. Anyway, they introduced an upgrade at Silverstone, is what happened. It didn't go that well at Silverstone, but they expected it would show much better on lower speed circuits. Lo and behold, it really has. And I don't think anyone expected them to be 5th and 7th on the grid, with Charles Leclerc's Ferrari in between them. But it just goes to show that that's obviously a really effective step forward for their car on this type of circuit. The question mark will be more over tomorrow. And by the way, I should say they've been quick all weekend, Max Verstappen was pointing out, from first practice. So it's not actually the grid positions won't have surprised anybody in Formula 1 who's been watching how Alfa Romeo have been doing through the sessions, which is what the teams have been doing. The question is, can they keep it up in the race? Because they've traditionally, even if they've qualified well this year, they've tended to go backwards. So we don't know about that yet. But I guess this is the first sign of sort of genuine progress at Alfa Romeo. They've actually got on paper, this, or at least they had until this weekend, the slowest car on the grid, even if it hasn't maybe felt that way, but just statistically it is. And let's not forget, this is the team that it's already effectively the Audi Works team, even if it's not called Audi. It's going to be called Audi in 2026. They've got to be front line competitors by that time. Audi will not accept anything else. So there's a lot of pressure on them. And Andreas Seidel moved over from McLaren as team principal over the winter. They've had a technical reshuffle. He's bringing James Key over, who got sacked by McLaren, but he's joining in September. So it's a first step on a very long road for what will become Audi, what they hope back to the front.
But you find that strange? People who maybe didn't get it quite right at McLaren now maybe getting it right at Alfa Romeo. It's a strange one.
Well, he's not there yet. He doesn't start till September, but it's encouraging for them as Seidel tries to turn that team into a competitive team.
Yes, exactly. His role. Well, it was a great result for Zhou Guanyu. Hadn't reached Q3 all season until today, and improves his career best, qualifying by 4 places and out-qualifying his teammate Bottas. Valtteri, his 10th consecutive top 10 start at the Hungaroring, his best run on any racetrack. So there'll be ones to watch tomorrow. Can Lewis Hamilton hold on to that top spot? Jack, quick fire. Okay, that was meant to be quick fire, but that's all right. Don't worry, you take your time.
No, I think Max will come around him in the pit stops.
Oh, okay, fine. Chris?
Yeah, he's going to do it. He's going to go for it. He's either going to win or he's going to crash.
Oh, right. All in, all out. And Andrew Benson, keep it brief, will you?
Your head says Verstappen will get him at the pit stops somehow. But then it's Hamilton and it's Hungary, and so many times he's pulled something out of the hat in Hungary, so maybe.
I thought you were going to tell us what your heart was saying there, Andrew Benson. Of course not. Well, there's plenty to come on the BBC Sport website for you. We will be live at 2:45. You can join us there and we'll talk you through the Hungarian Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton on pole ahead of Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.